Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking an incredible shortcut into the ultimate structural blueprint. We're looking at the embryological development of your back.
Right, we're not just looking at the finished spine. We're trying to decode exactly how that entire axial skeleton gets assembled in the first place.
We've got a huge task, really. We're covering how the spine, the ribs, even the back muscles transition from these, simple segmented cells into the complex column that supports your entire life. Our goal for you is to be able to visualize this entire architectural process just by listening, to get the why behind the anatomy.
And to really succeed in that visualization, we have to start with the core concept, which is segmentation, or metamerism.
Metamerism.
Yeah, the adult back works because it's built in repeating units. You have bone, then disc, then nerve, over and over. And the source for all of this repetition is a temporary but absolutely essential structure in the embryo called the somite.
Okay, the somite.
These somites form from a group of cells called the paraxial mesenchyme, and they sit right next to the developing neural tube and the notochord. That initial layout dictates, well, everything that follows.
And I think we need to give the single biggest takeaway right up front. This is the concept that really changes how you look at every single vertebra in your body. It's called resegmentation.
Yes.
We're going to explain why your adult vertebrae do not line up with those original embryonic segments. It's a massive developmental shift, and that offset is the secret sauce. It's what dictates where your nerves and muscles end up. It's why you can bend over without, paralyzing yourself. So let's unpack that assembly line.
We should probably start with the foundation, the paraxial mesenchyme. These cells, they start their life as basic epiblast cells, and they ingress, they move through the primitive node and streak. What's critical is that as they migrate, they stick close to things. They keep contact with basal laminae.
So they're moving, but they're still connected.
Exactly. And the population we're really interested in is the one that's sort of waiting its turn. It's the pre-mesometic mesenchyme, where you might see it called the segmental plate.
Okay, so that's the raw, unorganized material for the spine.
That's a perfect way to put it. And to create the organized units, the somites, this mesenchyme undergoes a really remarkable transformation. It's called a mesenchymal to epithelial transition. They just stop being these wandering cells and suddenly form these discrete, highly organized epithelial spheres.
So it's like turning a flowing river of sediment into a neat stack of bricks.
That's it. And that process is somitogenesis. In humans, this assembly line kicks off incredibly early. The first pair appears around day 26. And the precision of it all is governed by this incredible phenomenon called the segmentation clock.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting for me. This isn't some arbitrary timing. It's an autonomous, genetically programmed rhythm. You see it in all vertebrates. It's like a molecular metronome.
It is. The clock is based on the rhythmic production of messenger RNAs for key signaling pathways. We're talking mainly Notch, Wnt, and FGF. You can think of these as the conductors of the orchestra.
We're like the speed control knobs for development.
Right. And this clock operates on these intrinsic pulses. You get a coordinated rhythmic beat of gene expression. It goes up, then it goes down. And this pulse controls precisely when the most cranial bit of that presemitic mesoblast separates to tinge off the next pair of somites.
That level of timing is just fascinating. And the speed is, well, it's mind-boggling. In chick embryos, a new pair of somites forms every 90 minutes.
Yeah, and humans are a bit slower. It takes us about 5 hours per pair. But what's really consistent is the dedication of the cells. A new cell entering that paraxial mesoblast has to go through about 12 of these rhythmic cycles before it finally segments.
So an individual cell's fate is decided over, about 18 hours from the moment it joins the stream?
Roughly, yes.
So we've got these organized somite spheres. What happens next? How do we actually get bone and muscle from that neat little package?
Well, once it's formed, the somite sphere differentiates very, very quickly. The real turning point comes when the ventral and the ventromedial part, it detaches, and it undergoes the opposite transformation, an epithelial to mesenchymal transition.
So it breaks ranks. It stops being a neat sphere and goes back to being migratory.
Exactly, and that population is the sclerotome. That's your future bone.
And the part left behind, the neat, rectangular epithelial sheet.
That's the dermomyotome, the future muscle and the deep layer of the skin.
Okay.
Now, focusing on the sclerotome for a second, this is the population that immediately streams inward. It migrates toward and then surrounds the notochord and the neural tube. It forms a sheath around them. It's getting ready to form the cartilaginous precursor of the vertebral body, or centrum.
Okay, so here it is, the big reveal. resegmentation. This is the part that, for me, is critical for clinical visualization. Because if the sclerotome just formed one bone per segment, the nerve would exit right into a solid block of bone.
You'd have nerve compression every time you moved. Precisely. To solve that mechanical problem, the sclerotome segment splits. There's an internal boundary. It's called von Ebner's fissure, and it divides the segment into a loosely packed cranial half and a densely packed caudal half.
Loosely packed and densely packed.
Got it. Now here's the crucial part. Each definitive vertebra is not segmental. It develops from the fusion of the caudal half of one bilateral pair of sclerotomes and the cranial half of the very next pair.
So you're fusing half of one segment with half the segment just below it. It's like breaking a brick in half and then gluing it to half the next brick in line.
That's a great analogy. It creates a new offset unit. Your final vertebral body is a compound structure. It takes tissue from two adjacent embryonic segments. That fusion happens centrally, forming the median centrum. And the pedicles, the parts that form the neural arch, they come from those migrating sclerotomal cells that eventually fuse at these cartilaginous junctions. We call them the neurocentral synchondroses.
And those synchondroses are basically growth plates, right? They let the arch in the body get bigger.
They're vital. And if they fail to fuse correctly, you can get all sorts of pathologies later in life.
So if the vertebra is a compound structure, what about the thing between them, the discs?
The intervertebral disc is just as complex. It has a dual origin. The tough outer fibrous ring, that's the annulus fibrosus, it develops from the sclerotome mesenchyme that stays dense at that original boundary. But the central jelly-like part, the shock absorber,
The nucleus pulposus.
the nucleus pulposus, that develops from the remnants of the notochord cells themselves, which expand into the space created between the developing vertebrae.
And this all circles back to why resegmentation is so functionally important. Because the bone shifted, becoming intersegmental,
Right.
the spinal nerves and their vessels, which remain segmental, now line up perfectly to exit through the intervertebral foramina. They're nestled safely between two vertebral bodies.
The whole system gains mobility and protection. It's an ingenious solution.
Okay, so we've built the bone. Now let's go back to that other structure, the dermomyotome, which gives us the muscles.
Right, the dermomyotome. It's this proliferative rectangular epithelial sheet, and it's essentially the source of almost all the striated muscles in your body. It releases muscle precursor cells, myoblasts, from its four edges, and these then travel to their final destinations.
And there are two main groups here. The intrinsic back muscles, those deep stabilizing muscles right on the spine, are the epaxial musculature.
Correct. They arise from the dorsomedial lip of the dermomyotome. They don't migrate far at all. They just fuse right there. And because they're dorsal, they are always innervated by the dorsal rami of the spinal nerves.
And then you have the hypaxial musculature. These are the real travelers. They come from the ventrolateral edge. At trunk levels, they're forming the layered muscles of the abdomen, the intercostals, obliques, rectus abdominis.
But, and this is critical, at the cervical and limb levels, these cells migrate enormous distances. We're talking about muscle precursors traveling from the back to form the intrinsic muscles of your tongue, the huge sheet of the respiratory diaphragm, and every single muscle in your arms and legs.
And their original location dictates their innervation no matter how far they go.
Exactly. They're always innervated by the ventral rami of the spinal nerves.
Quick clarification on the skin before we move regions. If the dermomyotome is involved, how much of the dermis, the deep skin, does it actually make?
That's a great question. The somatic contribution to the dermis is surprisingly limited. It only contributes to the dermis in the area immediately over the epaxial muscles, so basically the skin of the back itself. The rest of the body's dermis comes from the lateral plate mesoderm.
Okay, let's jump to the most geometrically complex area, the occipitocervical junction, the transition from skull to neck. This is happening between the fourth and fifth somites embryologically, and the first two vertebrae, C1 atlas and C2 axis, are total wildcards.
They absolutely are. The development of the axis C2 is really unique because it actually absorbs central material from the somite above it to form the dens. Researchers call it the XYZ centra complex. X is the tip of the dens, Y is the base of the dens, and Z is the true centrum of the axis.
Wait, I remember reading about a temporary disc in there somewhere.
You're right, a temporary intervertebral disc actually shows up between Y and Z around stage 17, but then it just disappears. This whole complex fusion explains why C2 looks like a pillar. And the two spots where your skull actually sits on the spine, the occipital condyles, they're derived from the cranial part of the first cervical sclerotome. sclerotome 5 embryologically.
It's an incredibly complex merger, sets the stage for a lot of potential anomalies.
It does.
So moving to the whole spine, it starts as 33 or 34 pieces of cartilage. Ossification, turning it to bone, starts with three main centers, one in the body, the centrum, and one in each half of the vertebral arch.
And here's that counterintuitive timeline again. Ossification doesn't just start at the head and work its way down. It actually begins in the lower cervical and upper thoracic regions first, and then spreads out. It's not a simple craniocaudal wave.
And the spine isn't even finished at birth. Maturation takes decades. Those primary centers are connected by synchondroses, which are cartilaginous joints that close very gradually. For example, the vertebral arches in your lower back aren't fully united until you're about 6 years old.
And then you get secondary centers, like the ring apophysis around the edges of the vertebral body. They show up at puberty and don't fully fuse until you're maybe 25. It explains why certain kinds of spinal injuries are specific to adolescence.
Speaking of things going wrong, what happens if one of those initial centrum centers just doesn't form correctly?
If one of the bilateral centers is suppressed, if it fails to develop, you get a wedge-shaped bone. We call it a cuneiform vertebra or hemivertebra. And because the spine now has this built-in imbalance, it often leads to a lateral curve, congenital scoliosis.
And in the thoracic region, the ribs, they come from the costal processes.
Yes, the costal processes grow out laterally to form the ribs. And importantly, they're also derived from the lateral sclerotome. Again, it's a compound origin, drawing from the caudal half of one segment and the cranial half of the next.
Which explains why sometimes you see remnants elsewhere, like a cervical rib on C7.
Exactly. It's just an extended costal process that was supposed to regress but didn't. It just shows the plasticity of these segments. We also see fusions in the lower cervical spine, often linked to a breakdown in that segmentation clock. Klippel-Feil syndrome is a classic example. It's congenital fusions, sometimes linked to the loss of the MEOX1 gene expression.
Okay, let's shift fully to the clinical side. Let's start with the failure of midline fusion, which is generically termed spinal dysraphism.
Right. That's the blanket term for any anomaly where the vertebral arch, that neural arch, fails to fuse in the back around the neural tissue. It leaves a gap in the protective bony ring.
And the most common form of this is the spina bifida spectrum. We have spina bifida occulta, the closed form. That affects, about 5% of the population. It's masked by skin, often just a bifid spinous process in the low back, maybe with a little tuft of hair over it. Usually no symptoms.
Right. And then you have the more severe spina bifida cystica, which is obvious at birth. Here, we really need to differentiate between two types based on what's actually sticking out. A meningocele is where only the meningeal sac and cerebrospinal fluid are herniating. But much more serious is the meningomyelocele.
And that's where the actual spinal cord and neural tissue are herniated into the sac.
Exactly. And that distinction is vital because meningomyelocele has a very high association with Arnold-Chiari II malformation and the subsequent hydrocephalus. Over 90% of those neonates need a shunt immediately.
This leads right into another concept, doesn't it? Tethered cord syndrome.
It does. Normally, as the fetus grows, the vertebral column grows faster than the spinal cord. This pulls the end of the cord upwards, rostrally. It ascends from the coccyx all the way up to about the L3 level by the 7th month. But with spina bifida, the cord can be physically anchored in place.
It limits that upward movement.
It tethers it. So as the bony column keeps lengthening, the cord gets stretched, and that leads to progressive neurological problems.
Okay, finally, let's define Chiari malformation type I, or CMI, which is related to those craniovertebral junction issues we talked about earlier.
CMI is defined radiographically. It's when the cerebellar tonsils are displaced 5 millimeters or more below the plane of the foramen magnum. The classic hypothesis is that this is linked to a hypoplastic posterior cranial fossa.
Meaning the back of the skull cavity is just too small.
Exactly. Likely due to shortness in the basioccipital bone, which crowds the cerebellum and pushes it downward.
You know, what's truly fascinating when you pull all this together is realizing that the entire functional outcome, the strength, the flexibility, the protective capacity of the adult back, it all depends on that one initial, precise, molecular level event, resegmentation.
That's the synthesis. Breaking a somite in half and fusing it with its neighbor to create an offset unit is literally the secret to human mobility. It's connecting 4 somite halves to make one vertebra, and in doing so, strategically placing the intervertebral disc right opposite the nerve exit. It enables movement without constant impingement.
It's incredible. So for you, the learner, if you can keep these 4 core concepts crystal clear, you've got it. One, the somites and that hyper-precise clock-regulated assembly line.
2. Sclerotome resegmentation, creating that crucial bone disc offset.
3, the dermomyotome, which splits to form the intrinsic back muscles, the epaxial, and all those migratory muscles, the hypaxial. And 4, the two main clinical consequences: spinal dysraphism, like spina bifida, and those craniovertebral junction anomalies, like the Chiari malformations.
That's the framework.
And here's a final provocative thought to leave you with. Consider the relentless temporal precision of that segmentation clock. We know that tiny timing errors lead to major defects like Klippel fail. So what other subtle rhythmic cellular processes operating on a 5-hour cycle in the human embryo are currently dictating the fate of other organs and systems that we haven't even fully mapped yet? That precise timing mechanism is still out there, waiting to be fully understood. That's it for this deep dive. Keep digging into the anatomical basis of clinical practice, and we'll catch you next time.